so next we're looking at a letter pattern. They've told you semi-formal letter, okay, which is quite a challenging tone to get. So a lot of the issues candidates have while writing these letters is being able to choose the grammar and especially the vocabulary that's really appropriate to the tone they're trying to achieve. And it's actually quite a high-level skill. And so for candidates who are trying to look to get that sort of band 6+ kind of level in their IELTS, really need to be, it's really helpful to read a lot of examples of these kind of letters. And so what I often advise students to do is to sort of, who are trying to go for that higher level, is to go onto these kind of like business advice blogs or maybe like advice websites and read through the kind of letters that are on there, because they often talk a lot about tones in emails and how should you respond to your manager and what's the best kind of tone to do that in. And so that can sort of often help get that kind of feeling. Once you've read it a lot, it's quite helpful. You can imagine it more in your brain. You can imagine it more in your mind, what you're supposed to be going for. So let's look at the topic. The topic is you're working for a company. You need to take some time off work and want to ask your manager about this. Write a letter to your manager. Explain why you want to take the time off. Give details about the amount of time you need, and then suggest how your work could be covered while you were away. Okay? So first things I'm thinking now, okay? You're writing to your manager. So it's semi-formal in that your tone should really be more on the sort of formal side. Because even though you work with them, it's a coworker, it's a senior coworker, okay? So your tone needs to be polite, and sort of, asking for permission, basically. So you're asking it. So everything you need to be sort of focusing on, you're asking for permission to do something, okay? So it's going to be stuff like polite formals, like could I, or I'd like to request, or, further to previous discussion. Or, I'd like to request some more time off. Further to previous discussions, I followed up with my doctor and he recommended that I take an additional 3 weeks of sick time or something like that. The details about the amount of time, I'm also thinking in terms of content, okay? Is the content that you're discussing appropriate? Okay? So you need to talk about the amount of time, but honestly, really, when you're talking to a manager or a senior person at work, I don't know what the sort of cultural norms are in Korea, but very much in the UK, it's very much about your private life is private or confidential, okay? So if you're asking for time off, maybe this you could talk about like, your child is sick and you need to take care of your child, or, your friend's getting married, so you need to travel to go to an international wedding, or, someone in your family died and you need to go to a funeral. The feeling in the UK is that we're quite like a private society and we don't like to share personal information about ourselves, especially about medical issues, especially about family issues, okay? So in terms of content, I would suggest that you want to be brief and only give the sort of minimum details that a manager would need to know, okay? So it's not good in British culture, it's not good to go into detail about your medical issues or even to be very particularly specific about the medical issues that you're suffering under. I've had an instance here before in Korea where students have said to me just straight up like, I've got severe diarrhea or something and I need to do this or I need to do that. And I'm just like, whoa, that's way too much information. That's far too personal to share with someone. So that's a cultural issue that might come up for some candidates who are practicing for this type of issue. In the UK, it's very common just to say, I have a medical issue. I can supply a doctor's certificate if needed, but it's my private issue. And so it's your company, it's very rare for your company to know details about what's going on with you like that. The same, for example, if your child was sick, the company just needs to know that there's a medical issue with your child and the company in the UK wouldn't expect to know the details. So that's just a cultural thing to be aware of. And I think it's very similar in America. So those are the two things I'm thinking of right now. If it's a sort of family emergency or some kind of personal medical issue that you would need to formally request time off for. So the big chunk of this letter, I'm thinking what it should be is suggesting how your work could be covered while you're away, okay? So you're giving your solutions, Okay. So in terms of looking at this letter, I'm thinking the first two are going to be kind of the shorter sections, and then the biggest chunk of your letter is going to be discussing the practical, how your work is going to be covered. Okay. So that's kind of like my thinking as I'm looking at the topic, and then let's go and see what this candidate has written about. Dear Mr. Yun, okay, I'm writing this letter to ask your permission for a brief time away from work. It is only appropriate that I talk to you about this matter because you are the manager. This is a slightly odd sentence. And you don't need to say it. I mean, the manager knows they're the manager. The first sentence, okay, I'm writing this letter to ask your permission for a brief time away from work. We would probably say actually in the UK, we'd be ask to ask your permission for some leave. So we call it leave, paid time off, something like that. It is only appropriate that you're my manager or something. I think in reality, if I was writing to my manager, I would say something like, I'm emailing or I'm writing to you in order to officially document my request. Or I'm giving you warning as my manager. I want to give you a heads up in advance. Okay, so that's the sort of phrase we would use, heads up, or to give you a heads up. So to give some warning or give some advance notice. So if you want to be slightly more formal, you could say to give you advance notice. So I would probably replace this sentence with something like that. Dear Mr. Yun, I'm writing this letter to ask your permission for some leave. I'm writing to give you advance notice in order to officially document my request, as I need to request a significant period away from work. Something like that. I'm giving you advance notice so that we can come up with some solutions about how we're going to cover my work. Okay, let's look at the next section. 3 months ago, I coincidentally found a lump on my neck. Ooh, my husband first noticed it while giving me a neck massage. I visited the doctor immediately on my day off. She advised that I get a sonogram and a biopsy to make a correct diagnosis. Okay, so just first off, things I like. Coincidentally, nice vocabulary. Sonogram, diagnosis, biopsy. This is all very good, nice, medical specific vocab. My issue, I don't know if you noticed it when I was reading it, but this is not appropriate to say to your manager at work that your husband was giving you a neck massage. That's, okay, first of all, I'm thinking as a British person, this is a UK thing, I'm thinking too much information, too personal, too private. I was uncomfortable reading it, could you tell? I don't know, maybe this is just a cultural thing, but I can tell you from a British perspective, this is too much detail into the issue. Even about the lump on your neck kind of makes me uncomfortable to read. I don't know if you could hear it in my tone of voice, because I'm already feeling as I'm reading it that this is too personal and too private to go into your medical issues. To be totally honest, I think if I was in this similar situation and I was writing to my manager, I mean, it is a semi-formal, I guess, so you kind of do have a relationship with your manager, but I would be wanting to say something like, as you know, 3 months ago, I started getting some medical tests done. I've started getting some medical tests done. The results of those tests have come back, and my doctor has advised me to get a sonogram and biopsy. My doctor even has advised me to take 3 weeks off work in order to get further tests done, to help diagnose my problem. And just keeping it vague like that, like this is too much, the lump and everything like that. You would sort of be saying like, I've been getting tests done. The results have come back. I don't need to know what results. I don't need to know what tests that were done. My doctor advised me to take, and this is where you want to give the specifics, take 3 weeks off work in order to maybe undergo further diagnosis. or, you know, to visit a specialist in order to get further clarification or something like that. I mean, I guess maybe this is cultural, but just in terms of content, it feels inappropriate for me to read this. So that's my first issue with the letter. Let's go on to the next section. The nurse at the hospital informed me that I was to be admitted for 2 days for this procedure. On the first day of admission, they planned to do some blood tests and perform the biopsy. The doctor wants to keep me overnight at the hospital to check for any signs of adverse reaction since they will sedate me during the biopsy. She said I can go back to work the next day, so I need 2 days in total. Okay, so again, what this candidate is really showing me really well is this candidate really has excellent vocabulary. Okay, I'm really liking the word choice that they're using. Procedure, admitted, admission, blood tests, perform the biopsy. Good, correct verb linked to what they're doing. Keep me overnight. Adverse reactions, sedation. Okay, so these are all excellent, very specific medical vocabulary words that are used correctly and appropriately in this context. However, again, could you tell I was uncomfortable reading it? That it's too much detail about what is going to happen on each day. Like, I feel like as your manager, I don't need to know this. I mean, I suppose it's okay to tell me that you're getting a biopsy done and just leave it there, so I know that it's quite a serious thing. But the key thing is you're telling them how much time you need off. You need 2 days in total. So, I mean, if I was saying that, I would say something like, under the recommendation of my doctor, I need to take a total of 2 days leave to cover the tests and recovery time. As this will be medical leave, I will be unable to work remotely or answer or check emails or something like that. You know, I keep it focused on work. Like, as a manager, I don't need to know that on day 1 you're doing blood tests and on day 2 you're doing the biopsy. Which is a shame because this candidate has really used some great vocabulary. Their grammar is excellent in this paragraph. It's nice and specific. However, it's just the content of it. I feel as the manager, I felt this was sort of giving me too much information. Okay, then we go on to the third section. I've already talked to my colleague Liz about my need of absence. This would be my leave of absence, and she agreed to reschedule this month's shift if you say it's okay. I like that, reschedule the shift, good vocabulary. If you have a better idea how this should be handled, please let me know. This is a really good way to end, politely end an email, okay, by giving a solution. This is what I want to do, and then to make it polite, you give it the option back to the other person. If you have a better idea about how this should be handled, good use of vocabulary, please let me know. Yours cordially, Anna H. So, I mean, my issue with this letter is they've kind of done the opposite of what I suggested at the start, which is that they really focused on the reasons and the medical details and had a very short section on how they could handle the work. So in order to keep it kind of the medical stuff vague and appropriate in terms of content, this would be what I would suggest you would want to give more detail about. And this is where you kind of have to practice as a candidate how to get creative in your answers. So you could say stuff like, you know, I've already talked to, I wouldn't tend to say my colleague because your manager should really know who Liz is. I've already talked to Liz about my leave of absence and she agreed to reschedule this month's shift if you say it's okay. You could say I will also endeavor, means like try really hard to complete the filing and documentation for the, I'm just making this up now, for the upcoming seminar before my absence, Now it says something like, John from accounting should be able to answer any queries about the budgeting over those days. And I suggest emails on that subject are forwarded to him. Okay, so this is, you're sort of giving more detail. This is where you kind of have to imagine and sort of make stuff up in the test. So I've kind of created that maybe there's a project that I'm working on. I'm developing this seminar, and so I'm making more suggestions about, you know, I'm going to try and complete my work ahead of time. Here's someone who would be able to answer any questions about my area of expertise while I'm out of the office, or something like that. So this is where I would expand, because as a manager, this is the sort of key information I would want to know in terms of content, rather than your husband was giving you a neck massage and found a lump. Overall. So overall, I'm looking at this. I think in terms of task achievement, I probably want to give maybe a 5.5, because they did cover each of the 3 criteria laid out in the letter. My issue with them was sort of tone, and specifically in terms of the content was slightly inappropriate for what they're being asked to write. In terms of coherence and cohesion, I thought it actually hung together quite well, so I would want to give a sort of like a 6 point. That they had a sort of consistent, coherent story all the way through. Their vocabulary really was quite excellent. So 6.5, I could see an argument for pushing that to a 7 because of the medical vocabulary and words like biopsy and things like that I thought were very specific to the topic. Their vocabulary really was very good. Their grammar was also reasonably good. There were sort of not very many corrections that I had to make. So grammar, I was sort of probably want to give them a 6 for it. So I think overall it would be fair to give this candidate a level 6 for this letter. I would just advise them really, and the tone and the content thing is so difficult to do under pressure in the IELTS exam. So I would really recommend that they take some time, look through some business blogs or advice columns in English. And so the more you read, the more you get a feel for business norms kind of in the UK or America. And I think this might just be a cultural thing, that it may be in Korea it's more appropriate to talk about your private medical issues with your company. But really in the UK, that's not something that's done unless you have a kind of a close personal relationship with your colleagues. So that's just the main issue that I would advise this candidate to work on. But overall, I thought the vocabulary was excellent.